Welcome to Untold, podcast about Utah's boldest entrepreneurs and business leaders. Their behind the scenes battles, breakthroughs, and what the heck were we thinking moments. These are the stories you'll wish you'd heard sooner about the businesses you might not have known were right next door. With me today, I've got the leader of one of those businesses, Chad Meyerson, CEO of Downeast Clothing. Welcome, Chad. Thanks for joining me.
Jon, it's great to be here with you today.
Awesome. Yeah. Really looking forward to this episode. When we first met, I was looking on social media, I was looking at your LinkedIn profile and I saw, oh gosh, he's kind of new in his current role. I don't know. And I started doing the LinkedIn uh, snooping like I usually do and started going down your resume and it just never ended. Like you had interesting career move after interesting career move. And I thought, I just got to talk to this guy because you've got a pretty unparalleled set of experiences. Um, but before we go back in time, maybe just for listeners who maybe have heard the term Down East Clothing, introduce people to the company that you're running now, and then we'll come back full circle to maybe what's happening with the company.
Sounds great. So Downeast as a brand has actually been around for nearly 35 years. Started in 1991 here in Utah, small group. They were selling off-price clothing from different brands that were trying to liquidate, and that's how it began. Slowly morphed into off-price furniture, different kind of odds and ends. And then after a number of years, pivoted to creating its own products. And so evolved into clothing and furniture, but of their own creation. So a complete design department, manufacturing, the whole 9 yards. And so the brand has been around for quite a while, but in various iterations. There are still people that come into our stores asking for the Pottery Barn bunk bed that they bought or the lucky jeans that they bought back in the 90s. And so it's been an interesting evolution, especially as not only has it evolved in terms of what the brand is, but also the split with home and clothing. So it's kind of been multiple companies within one for a number of years. And when I came on about 6 or 8 months ago, it's actually been a short time. I had consulted with the company on the marketing side for a while before that. But when I came on in a full-time capacity, the brand was in the middle of a complete reorganization. We have since shed home entirely, focused all in on clothing. We can talk a little bit about that. But my job here and coming on with Downeast was to guide the company through that transition. And it was a necessary but painful one. In a lot of places, we lost a lot of great people that had been with this brand for a very long time, but there were changes and cuts and reorganizations that were needed in order to make the company viable. And really, really proud of the work that we've done the past several months. Pleased to say that, for the first time in a while, we're putting up profitable numbers, seeing months and
Awesome.
quarters in the black, which is just incredible. So we may be smaller as a brand now, but we are more sustainable and have a much brighter future, which is great. Not to say that the company hasn't been in great hands in the past, but there were a lot of changes that were needed, and it's been fun to be part of that evolution and reorganization to try to get to profitability and sustainability.
Great story. It's interesting. A lot of times when companies are going through that magnitude of changes, they also do rebranding. And I notice you guys stayed with the brand. Tell me a little bit about the calculus behind that move.
Yeah, that's a great question. The Downeast brand, we believe, has significant equity and name recognition throughout the West Coast. We're primarily in Utah and Idaho currently, but we've had a retail presence in about a dozen states on the West Coast, Arizona, Nevada, Washington, Oregon, California. So the brand has been in this part of the country for a long time, as well as fulfilling on the e-commerce side nationwide. So we really felt like there was equity in that brand. And one of our challenges the past several years was just an inability to really confirm with the customer who Downeast is. Are you off price? Are you furniture? Are you clothing? Are you, what are we as a brand? And so really our focus the past several months has been consolidating and saying, no, this is who we are. We are Downeast Clothing. This is what we do day in and day out. We manufacture our own products. They're styles that you won't see anywhere else. And we're driving that home to try and eliminate that brand confusion. So we believe the brand has significant equity. We just want to clarify what we are and who we are.
Excellent. Wow. Well, I'd like to kind of journey back because, your start and then the moves after, probably aren't really the typical career path for a retail executive. So like, I'd love to go back. You started in airline business. Would love to hear a little bit about your experience with JetBlue, and and then let's talk about when it got really interesting.
Okay. So yeah, I definitely have had an unorthodox path, I would say. When I was finishing school, I actually did my senior internship at Ford Motor Company back in Dearborn, which is a great experience, a really great company, and kind of had the options as I was finishing school to go, do I want to go auto manufacturing with Ford, or do I want something a little bit different? And honestly, John, the impetus behind going to the airline was which one had the better perks. Love to travel. There's an airline that had a big presence in my home market in Salt Lake City, and so I said, "Hey, let's go for the airline." Joined JetBlue in a revenue management capacity, setting airfares, understanding trends and demand uh, management. So it was a really great way to learn the ins and outs of the business. I always enjoyed travel, but then it became just a core part of my life. But
Mhm.
even that, a lot of external factors caused my path through JetBlue to be altered considerably. That department ended up being relocated from Salt Lake City to New York. And at the time, young family didn't necessarily want to relocate to the East Coast. And so made a switch over to the sales side, started running corporate sales and group and meeting sales for the airline. Again, a totally different path than I had been on, but a
Yeah.
really fun and interesting one, and ultimately took over the entire corporate sales organization and was running it from here. And then the airline at the time was based in New York, still is, but heavy presence in the Northeast, but decided and saw an opportunity in the Latin American Caribbean market. And it was just very young and nascent in terms of what JetBlue was in the international markets. But we saw an opportunity there, and I saw an opportunity there. And so I threw my hat in the ring and said, "Hey, you're growing this Latin America Caribbean region. I'd love to be part of it." And at the time, they were actually considering bringing over a very seasoned executive from American Airlines who had a huge presence, obviously, in the Caribbean and Latin America. And they had someone, that had 20 plus years experience working in this
Mhm.
market. Here I was, a couple of years out of college saying, I want to go run it instead. So really had to make my case. And ultimately, I ended up moving the whole family to Orlando without the job and the title yet, on a basically go and, if you can prove yourself and do a good job, then we'll put you in this role. And so it was a bit of a risk, bit scary at times,
Mhm.
but ultimately, I speak fluent Spanish, which was a huge benefit. Spent a lot of time in the region, just understanding culturally really was what got it across the line to say, look, I know these markets, I know these communities, I know this culture, and as much as somebody that has 20 years experience might have spent more time here, I can take our actual brand and adapt it and translate it into these markets. And
Oh,
they believed the message. I proved the case. We ultimately grew to dozens of destinations throughout the Caribbean. Latin America opened up Central and South America for the airline. I was at the time the only Spanish speaking executive at JetBlue, which was just a fascinating role given our presence. We had a huge presence in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, eventually
mm,
Colombia and Peru. And there were press conferences that needed to be given, and they had to be in Spanish because they were in Costa Rica. And so I got to do a press conference with the president of Costa Rica just because I knew the region, I knew the language, and I could do it. So it was a really fun experience, albeit sometimes daunting, but
yeah.
just very cool path with JetBlue.
Wow. So you differentiated yourself and basically beat out a guy with way, way, way more experience. Like, so you mentioned, okay, you speak Spanish and maybe he didn't. Were there other ways that you think you differentiated or you were able to stand out and get the job? Like, what advice would you give somebody today that was going into a situation like that?
So for me, where I really tried to separate myself and point to some value was just a really deep, not only understanding but passion for the region and the culture. Right,
Mhm.
the executive that I actually worked with him for quite a while as we set up the region. It was a bit more transactional at some of the other airlines with their time there, right? Hey, we're a big airline, you're a little island, we're going to come in here and, we're going to be here and it's going to be great for you and you're lucky to have us kind of a mentality. And, no disrespect to what some of the things were built down there, but I felt like our brand needed to be different. And so we went in and we met with local tour operators, we met with local governments, local mayors, local groups, and local travel agencies and said, hey, we're a little bit different. We want to work with you. We want to work alongside you. We want to make sure that, the plane flies both ways, right? Inbound and outbound. And if I'm only filling it one direction, that's a problem. And so I want to make sure that we understand the nuance because, Puerto Rico is different from the Dominican Republic, and that's
Yeah.
different from, Grand Cayman, that's different from Jamaica. And so really trying to make everyone in that region feel like, hey, we want to be partners in this. We're not just coming in to take advantage of your beautiful beaches and destinations and culture. We want to be partners and make it work. And that seemed to resonate really well. And I think was one of the reasons that they liked that model over maybe what was
Okay.
offered elsewhere.
Oh, good. So the strategy also differentiated you in the approach. That's cool. Yeah, I have more questions about that experience that I'll come back to, but because but then you took that travel bug and started kind of into the startup space. So why did you leave JetBlue and where, tell me about founding John Tarou.
Sure. So that was, I feel like, and this is maybe just my own opinion, but after you've spent a number of years, I think I was in JetBlue about 8 years, you really start to understand the industry a little bit better, right? You
Yeah.
can look at it from the outside, you can study, you can read books, but working in it for a while, you really do start to understand the ins and outs and maybe some of the gaps that exist within the travel space. And so as I was traveling throughout the region, I've been to over 55 countries in my life, which has been amazing. They're all different. They have different experiences and different offerings. And in that travel, oftentimes I'd come across people that I would speak with and they would say, hey, I really want to take my wife on a vacation. Where should I go? Or I want to take my kids, or we're going on a family trip with 25, members of the family. Where should we go? And as I thought through it, I said, well, it kind of depends, right? Like, what are you looking for? Right? Do you want a
Right.
beach with a drink in your hand and someone, to go to dinner later? Do you want zip lining? Do you want a casino? Do you want rest? What are you looking for? Because depending on what you want, I can tell you where to go, but it's going to depend. And I realized that most of the travel websites that were out there just said, hey, I live in Salt Lake and I want to go to Maui. Great. Here's
Yeah.
your airfare. Here's your hotel. There wasn't anything that said, well, you want to go to Maui, but why? Well, I really like the beaches and they have great volcanoes that I can hike to as well. Okay, that's cool. Did you know there's an island called St. Lucia that has incredible beaches and incredible mountainous volcanoes that you can hike? And the response was always, well, no, I didn't know that was a thing, right? And so me and a friend that I knew since I was about 8, started brainstorming this idea of a website where instead of saying I want to go from point A to point B, it was tell me what you want to do and I'll recommend the best places that have those features and options. And so that's what formed the impetus behind John Tarou. Again, you came to the website, you didn't say where you wanted to go, you said what you wanted to do, and then we spit out recommendations that said, hey, here's where you should go based on everything that you want in a vacation. And so that was my first foray into a startup and a build out and a website and all that goes into it, which was fun. It was while I was still at JetBlue. So it was kind of a side, just passion project that I got to do as part of, in addition to my work in the Caribbean region.
Wow, cool. And then you carried that on through some more travel related businesses before landing in women's clothing. So take us briefly through that evolution, and and I'm also just curious, like, so you're kind of following, like, what thread are you following? Like, is there anything that's tying these things together for you in the moment, or maybe just looking back?
Yeah, I think the biggest part for me was I did very quickly recognize where there is an opportunity and a need, there is a value proposition to be presented, right? That's what I feel like took me to the international region with JetBlue. I saw an opportunity or a gap in the market with John Tarou. And so I think that would be the thread that carried me through. Ultimately, with John Tarou, we launched the website. It was a really interesting experience. It wasn't easy. It wasn't a home run, but it was fascinating to learn. We can go into as much detail as you want on that, but we ended up running a marketing campaign as part of that because we were bootstrapping the whole project, and it got enormous global attention. I remember the day I was in my house and Good Morning America, Al Roker picked up the story of what we were doing, and it just completely exploded. Just the attention, we weren't ready for it, but it grew massively. And so we had this marketing campaign that we spent, a very, very small amount on that ultimately went global and got tons and tons of media attention. And that was just a fun experience that you never really you can't really plan on, right? Um,
Yeah.
but that got us a lot of visibility. And there was a travel company in based here in Utah that really was great at selling hotels, but they didn't have travel inspiration, they didn't have airline, they didn't have a number of those pieces. And so the opportunity came up for me to speak with them. Ultimately, join their team. They acquired John Tarou, the entire entity, and folded it into their portfolio. And
Okay.
I also helped them build their airline business, at least explore that part of the business. And so it allowed us to come back. My wife's family's from here in Utah, and so it allowed us to come back to the state, which was a huge benefit, and allowed me to continue the travel piece, which I thought was going to be my entire career. Little did I know, I quickly had an opportunity to realize that if you can sell an airplane seat or a hotel room, you can also sell a dress. And so that's how the transition ultimately came to move industries from travel over into clothing.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So, what are the common things like from the standpoint of the leader? Like, what are some of the universal things that you've seen across these experiences? Like a leadership tactic that works no matter where you are.
Yeah, it's been interesting having worked in a number of departments and companies and different groups at different levels. I've seen a lot of different kind of leadership, and it's allowed me to learn what attributes I want uh, to employ myself, but also maybe the ones that I don't. Um, for me, I think one of the biggest piece is, I really believe in building a team or joining a team and then leading that team. For me, you have to have the right people on the bus. You can move them seats, they can change roles, they can adjust, but if you get the right people in the company or in your group, it pays dividends. And for me, that was really important. Really, really attracting the right talent. And somebody saw that in me when I came over to the travel company. They said, "Hey, look, you've started this travel website. You've worked in airlines. We're not entirely sure exactly what your role here is going to look like, but we like what you do, and so we want to bring you on." And it morphed into a lot of different areas. In fact, at one point, I was signing merger deals with companies in Mexico, to do joint partnerships with websites in Latin America. So, you know, but they said, "Hey, look, we like your attributes, we like your abilities and your experience. We think there's a place for you with this team." And I like that because I do believe the right people can do a lot of different things, but it's really important that you have those right personalities. I think for me, the second piece is, I really subscribe to the philosophy that anybody that works with me or on my teams, I'm going to trust you until you give me a reason not to. You're there because you have a set of abilities or skills that we need. And so I want you to do your job, and I want to check in and support you. I want you to always feel like you're valued and heard, but I'm not going to micromanage you. I want you to do what you do. I want you to contribute to this team and make us a success until you give me a reason not to. If there's something that's going on that causes concern there, then that's when you get into, working with them, seeing if it is something that you can adjust or course correct. But beyond that, hey, you're here to do a job. I trust you to do it until you give me any reason not to.
That's great. You mentioned that sometimes you learned how to lead by seeing what not to do. What's an example that stands out for you of experience that you had where you said, "Boy, I don't want to be like that."
Yeah, that's very fair. I've had, I think everyone has different backgrounds based on how they grow up and where they grow up and the kind of home and environment that they grew up in. For me, a really, really rigid workplace, micromanaging and, um, I want to say this delicately, but kind of feeling like someone's breathing down your neck, that they don't trust you, that they don't necessarily want you there, is a really hard place to work, right? If someone, especially, when you move to a team and maybe the leader didn't necessarily isn't the one that brought you over, and you're
Mm,
put on a team, you know, if you feel like they don't really want you there, right? You were put on my team because someone else made it happen, don't really want you here. That's a hard place to work, right? I want to feel like I'm contributing and giving value and being a contributor to the team that's raising the whole group. And so for me, that was really hard. I want to make sure that everybody that works under me always feels like they're welcome, whether I hired them or not, right? And if they're not a good fit, let's talk about where they would be a good fit. Let's talk about, because if they're not happy working on my team, then I'm not going to be happy with her performance either. And so
mm,
I really, one of the things that I've tried to do, and I haven't been perfect at it, but I like to set myself reminders in the calendar that about once a quarter I'll reach out to each one of my direct reports with, maybe it's an email, maybe it's just a quick conversation over lunch, whatever it is, but just to say, hey, you know what? Here's what you're doing really well, and I really appreciate it. I want you to know that it doesn't go unnoticed, because I think maybe we assume people feel like, oh yeah, you deliver this project, good job. But I don't know that we hear it enough. And so just taking a few minutes and saying, hey, you did a really good job on this project, or I appreciated this part about you. Please keep it up. I think goes a long way. Even if they know, maybe they're listening to this podcast and they're like, oh, that's why he sent me that note. But still, if you take a minute to recognize, and it can't be generic, right? Hey, thanks for being a good employee. No,
right.
I want to tell them what they did well, and that makes them feel valued, that makes them feel seen, that their efforts are important and matter. And to me, that goes a long way.
Mm, yeah. A mentor of mine said something like, best way to get more of what you want is to make sure you recognize what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. And that specificity, I think, is the differentiator there, right? Can't
Agreed.
just be a generic pat on the back.
Yep.
Hmm. So, putting yourself on the other side of that, so you talked about, okay, what lessons did you take from other people? What lessons are you hoping that the people you lead take from you?
So for me as a leader, what I'd love to instill in those around me, is one, legitimate and genuine approachability, and just the feeling of support. The first one with approachability, I think it's really easy to say, hey, I'm the CEO, my door is always open, feel free to come in. But does a brand new hourly employee really feel like they can walk in the CEO's office and say, hey, I saw this display and I didn't think it was well and it would be better served here, right? And so that genuine approachability is different than just saying you're approachable. And so that to me comes from spending time, right? I spend time in the stores. I love going in and talking to the employees. The other day we opened up a new store up in Logan, and I was there for doing something else, and all of a sudden the store got real busy, and there was a line of people with two girls checking people out. So I just went over and said, hey, I'm just going to bag the clothes for you because I want to just see how it goes and see what happens. And I talked to customers and asked them what they had to say. But you can't learn as much from a report that comes out on daily sales as you can by actually being in the store and seeing it happen. And so letting them know, hey, we're all in this together. We're all on the same team. Let's actually talk and collaborate, because some of the best ideas we get come from the people that are doing this day in and day out. I don't know as well the ins and outs of upselling an additional clothing piece with a dress. And
Hmm.
so let's talk to the people that do know it really well. Like, that's a really, really big deal. And then the second piece, just I want to know that my team, I will have their back. If they do their best and they go out there, even if they fail, even if they try something that doesn't perform well, I'm still going to support them, right? I'm happy if you fail, if you try things, fail fast and fail quick, and move on and learn from it. But I want them to always know, hey, I'm going to support you. Okay. You went for this. We talked through it. Maybe it didn't work. Maybe it did. Doesn't matter. But I will always have your back when you go out there and you're trying to do what's best for the company, even if you're taking risks.
That's great. That first one, the approachability and the discipline you seem to have about making the time. I'm imagining, I don't know a senior leader or CEO who wouldn't completely agree with what you're saying, but so many people get caught up, get too busy, lose time. So what, what do you use? Like, how do you keep yourself accountable for that? Like, how do you make sure that it happens?
So I am so reliant on my calendar, honestly, for reminders and scheduling things, because if you don't plan and schedule, then oftentimes it doesn't happen. And so it's those, leaving the notes, setting the time, carving out the time, and actually holding it to say, hey, this is important, right? This is a priority, and so it's going to live on my calendar, and the time's going to be blocked. Because again, like you said, there's always a fire to put out, there's always a crisis to avert, there's always a finance meeting to discuss or a strategy to tweak, whatever the case may be. There's always going to be something that'll fill up your day. But if you block out some time for those important things that maybe get left otherwise, then you'll see a lot of value come from it.
Hmm. Okay. So you've covered a lot of the diversity of businesses that you've been in. I'm wondering if there's one lesson that right, that you've taken that basically is a common thing you see in every business that 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 if you want to be successful, like no matter where you are, this is something you have to pay attention to.
Yeah, we talked a little bit already about kind of the gaps or the opportunities within a business, but another one that I'll bring up to answer your question on this is it's maybe a less fun one to talk about, but a really important one, especially when you're starting a business or trying to grow a business. And that is that you can't always predict in time the rapid growth moments or the plateaus or the declines. But what you can plan on is that they will come. I'm sure there are some businesses out there somewhere that, started, grew, and the growth just never stopped. But it's certainly not one that I've ever been a part of. There, as much as you believe that that meteoric growth will just continue forever, it won't. And the good businesses, the ones that endure, the ones that last, are the ones that can recognize it, adapt, and modify their business model or their cost model or whatever they're seeing where the issues are, and then continue that trudge. It's like I said, it's been the case with small companies that I've been involved with large companies that I've been involved with, but there always comes that plateau. And if you're not ready for it, or if you're not understanding of how it works, then it can really catch you with, in a bad spot.
Mm.
Um, so, like I said, big, small, and honestly, in my experience, does not matter, but it will come, even if it doesn't seem like it will. You can be making money hand over fist. Life is great. Everything's going to continue forever. And then all of a sudden, that brick
Change
hits
is
you right in
coming.
the face. Yeah.
Yeah.
So be ready for it, because if you're not ready to adapt and modify the business to a new economic, whether it's macro or
Yeah.
microeconomics or internal or external factors, then it's going to be tough.
Well, and I think, there's been a number of those moments, in your career where, really tough calls had to be made, right? Whether down, sale of a company, rebranding, or, divesting or downsizing, all those kinds of things. So, what's the toughest call you ever had to make? And what did you learn about yourself as you went through that process?
So I would say it probably has to do. The first clothing company that I was running was called Ruli here in Logan. Great company founded by a husband and wife team, just wonderful people. And I joined it kind of during that meteoric growth to take over the marketing side, and shortly after moved into the CEO role to run the business. And, I think, like I said, I had seen this pattern before with companies, but knowing that that growth is not exponential and that it will level off and plateau, it still surprises you a little bit when it comes. So that company, I was running it. It started in 2019. Things were moving really heavy, going really well, expanding stores, opening new locations, building a brand new big warehouse and corporate facility. And then COVID hit. And for a heavy, a retail plus e-commerce business, as much as you think that might do well during COVID because everybody's home, shipping processes were interrupted, logistics plans were completely disrupted across the board, and so it became a very difficult place. Plus, competitive landscape changed. The boutique market for clothing here in Utah exploded with a lot of competition, a lot of different brands. You had international competitors like Shein and Temu overseas that were coming and selling. So that plateau came, and we had to adapt and adjust, and it wasn't easy. There were a lot of people that had been there since the beginning, and so I think when you first see it happen, it's like, okay, well, let's tweak and adjust little bit, see if we can make it through. And then the world doesn't roar right back. So you got to cut a little bit deeper. So with Ruli, to make a long story short, I ultimately had to take that company and downsize way beyond what anybody thought, including myself. And so, in fact, it was interesting. I put a post on LinkedIn talking about how it was the toughest day of my professional life, having to tell so many people that, hey, we can't keep this department. We can't keep doing it because if we want the company to survive, then we have to downsize and we have to decrease. And there was a lot of questions and comments, and most of it was understanding, but it was myself too. I was downsizing myself out of a job because the business couldn't sustain it and couldn't afford it. So my job then became, all right, how do I transition this to a level that is sustainable, that the business can survive, even if it's on a much smaller crew, and make sure that there is long-term sustainability, even if it doesn't include me. And that was hard, but again, a really good lesson to just understand, how that dynamic sometimes plays out. It was really interesting after the fact, reading through the comments on, I don't know if you ever don't ever read the comments section. Isn't that the famous reading through the comments? It was funny because there were a lot of people that would chime in and say, oh, this, CEO of a company, you're making seven figures. Sure, it's not a big deal for you. And I just thought in my head, I don't know, there are a lot of small business CEOs that are making seven figures. If they are, maybe I'm in the wrong business. But it was hard. It was impactful because it impacted real people, my own life and family included. But at the end of the day, just my what I love and what I enjoy doing is looking at a situation and an opportunity and saying, okay, how do we right size it? How do we optimize it? How do we make it run better, run smoother, run more profitable, grow? What do we do to make this better? And that's, again, whether that's a new region for an airline, whether that's a travel website, whether that's a clothing store. Honestly, I don't really care. I just like coming in and seeing an opportunity and a challenge and saying, all right, we're going to right size this ship and make it stronger.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, kind of the unselfishness of, looking at the situation objectively and see what's the right call, even if it's hard for you.
Right.
That's great. Um, yeah, a couple of other questions. So kind of a little bit random now. Um, what's more stressful, like having to do a press conference in a foreign country with the president, or trying to forecast the next trend in women's clothing?
Well, luckily for me, I don't actually have to do the latter. I have great people that design great products, and actually every month I sit in these meetings where we plan, because clothing planning actually takes place a full year in advance. We're planning for 2026, way in the future. Um, and every once in a while they'll say, "Hey, Chad, what do you think of this fabric versus that fabric, or this sleeve versus that sleeve?" And I just laugh and I tell them that's not why they hired me. um, but that goes back to kind of surrounding yourself with good people. I have great people, and so honestly, that never keeps me up at night. Now, the press conference in a foreign language, as much as I can speak the language, doing it in front of a television camera and going to be broadcast to millions of people is a very nerve-wracking experience. I actually did one, and it's funny. I was at the training center for the airline, and I meant to say the training center, but training and entertainment in Spanish is almost the same word. It's entrenamiento versus entretenimiento, and I said it wrong, and the whole film crew just started laughing because it was a little slip up, but again, it's a little nerve wracking when it's not your native language. But honestly, I love that region. I love the culture in Latin America, so well worth it. But it was pretty stressful trying to prep for an interview like that because any slip up or wording, you're going to hear about it.
Yeah, oh yeah, very much exposed, right, out of your comfort zone. Um, so you mentioned 55 countries that you've been to. So what's your favorite destination for leisure, and what's the best place for business travel?
So great. Well, I'm glad you clarified because if you just said the best for anything, that's what John Chiru was for, right?
Yeah.
Um, for leisure, also depends a little bit. For couples travel, the Maldives is unrivaled in its beauty and tranquility, as long as you're good with a very low key, mellow kind of a destination. It's absolutely stunning. The water, and you can go diving and sit on the beach, and it's just absolutely incredible. Huge fan. For business, honestly, I truly, truly love Colombia, Bogota. It is, when we started flying there, that was still coming out of its era of, is it safe? Is it not? And the job that the government did down there in terms of rebranding, making tourists and business ventures feel comfortable and safe. Bogota is just a thriving metropolis with incredible culture, the food, the business. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful place to be and live and work. Honestly, huge, huge fan.
Oh, that's cool. Very unexpected, I think, because for whatever reason, I'm still have that little bit of worry, right,
Mm.
about the violence and the things that we used to hear, right? But, now that I think about it, I mean, that was 30 years ago or more, right?
Yeah, they ran a campaign, a marketing campaign, and the tagline was "The only risk is not wanting to leave." And there were a lot of kind of polarized views on whether that was good to call out risk or not, but it ultimately served the country really well. And they kind of leaned into that to say, hey, we've really cleaned this up and it really is a safe, great place to be. So kudos
Hmm,
to that.
very cool. Um, Coming back to down east, you mentioned that we never know when the corner might be coming, right, on a brand. And it seems like you've gone through these kinds of things a few times. I'm wondering if, how do you know when it's time to pivot hard versus just tweaking, right? Because that's a very different, like, that's a different move. Like, you got to prepare the team different, like, everything about it is different. So, how do you know when it's coming?
Well, in a lot of ways, your finance team is the one that can give you the best look
How
as
much
far as
cash do we have?
right, right. How long can we survive on our current trajectory? My view, and I'll be real candid on this. I am an advocate of pivoting and cutting deeper early, just in case. I feel like you can always come back. And that was one of the hard things. Ruli is such a great company. It was hard to make change there just because of the dynamics that existed. There was, a family element there. And so it just made it a little bit trickier to make some of those hard decisions early on. And there was kind of well, we don't necessarily want to cut as deep. Let's wait and see. And, while I understand the rationale behind it, I'm of the mindset that I'd rather be more dramatic up front and knowing that I can release tension later than waiting too long to make those changes. Here at Downeast, the brand is owned by Maloof, which is based up in Logan. And the leadership team has really given me a lot of reign to make decisions. And, sometimes maybe it is a little bit deeper, but I'd rather run lean and have some time where, hey, you know what, we can add another head count here. We can make this change because we've been running leaner than we need to than the other way around. Because if you get too far deep and you start bleeding in the red for too long, it's harder to come back from that. So I do believe in cutting a little bit harder when the signs are saying you need to start versus waiting till later.
Yeah, because each one of the changes, right, takes effort and it takes change management and everything. If you're going to do it, go hard. And then if you need to build back, build back. Makes sense. Makes sense. So, I'm curious, I'm sure you wouldn't have scripted the kind of career that you've had, right, from the beginning.
Correct.
So I know it's maybe a lot to ask you to pull out a crystal ball, but I'm wondering, like, if everything goes to your plan, like, what do you think things are going to look like for you in 5 years? Like, think about your career from here. Like, where do you see it going?
So when I join a company, for me, I'm very much all in. I want to see it be successful, whether it's with me at the helm or not. I very much enjoy the challenge of getting the company right sized, getting it growing and going on the trajectory. I would love to be here for 5 years. I think that we can build this company back up, rely on the brand equity and grow it back to be 40, 50 stores. in a number of years because we do have a lot of brand value. We've got some core customer base that we can tap into. We've got some great design and styling pieces. And the best part about it is, as we are structured now, it's scalable, right? We can sustain and grow with the core team that we have with small additions. I think over time, a lot of businesses, and I think it just happens naturally, you take on a lot of, I don't know if it's always bloat, but like you grow, right? The organization grows and you have to add headcount here and oh, we need to add this and that. And so I want to stay disciplined throughout it. But again, what we've built as the base has the ability to scale and add more. And so I'd like to get back into all of the markets that we've been in the past and grow that, because as you grow and add more retail locations and more volume, you realize more economies of scale. Again, as long as you can grow in a disciplined way. And I think that that's one of my strengths that I'd like to employ throughout that is just, hey, I understand things are good. I understand, we're in the black, we're making money. That's great. Doesn't mean that we can, let loose, get fat and happy, right? We gotta keep it tight. We gotta keep it disciplined and really grow it, because that's when the real value comes, right? When you're able to realize those economies of scale and take your core business and really see it grow and thrive.
Mm. You mentioned earlier sometimes this perception of CEOs as like you've made it, like you're there, seven figures and all that stuff, right? I know, the reality is a lot different. Is there anything you could share that, as a leader or as a person, like what are you working on now? Like how are you growing right now?
So yeah, I think that's a great question. Spending the time obviously in the business, and you can be heads down and really focused, and this is all you're doing. But to me, the networking, things like this, talking with you, talking with other leaders is just really valuable. Everybody has different insights because they're working on a different project, but I really, really love spending time with different groups, completely unrelated to what I'm doing, possibly, right? Just understanding. I've got some, friends that are running a software startup down in Lehigh. Just watching along with their journey. To me, that's the uh, best ability. I mean, the books are great, and you can read all the books, and especially, you read about, how Instagram went to 1 billion and how some of these big companies got big. But when you and I first talked, John, just hearing, hey, you don't always hear the stories of the guy that started the smaller company down in, Southern Utah or Central Utah, or wherever the case may be. And so
Yeah.
I like hearing those stories. I like rubbing shoulders with those people because I think you learn a lot. I'm assuming that running a little clothing company with a dozen locations and an e-commerce presence is very, very different than, an Amazon and a Tesla, and that's okay. But it's different hearing the stories at this level because I think there's more of us, and I think there's a lot more lessons to be learned.
Yeah, I agree. And so much more relatable. Like I just can't see myself having a beer with Elon Musk or what, whatever. But, we have all kinds of really interesting, innovative business leaders around Utah. And so I appreciate you sharing your stories because I'm sure somebody is going to listen to that and relate. And, who knows, reach out, learn something from it, or maybe reach out and you might have a new relationship come as a result of it.
I welcome it. That sounds great to me.
Great. Well, fantastic. I know we only scratched the surface. The time went by super fast, but really appreciate you joining me. If anybody out there wants to learn more about what you're doing at Down East and keep an eye on how things are going, where could they go?
Yeah, so Down East, we've consolidated down. We're a single website. Downeaststyle.com is our website. I'm on LinkedIn. I try to be active and visible there too. I am happy to have a conversation. I've had people reach out and just say, "Hey, I'd love, chat or recommendation or hear the story or whatever the case may be." I like to believe that it can be approachable here in the office as well as from anybody else from that standpoint. So welcome those conversations for sure. And probably LinkedIn is the easiest way.
Awesome. I hope somebody puts it to the test. Thanks a lot for your time today, Chad. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you more on LinkedIn and hearing more about Down East as you bring the brand back to prominence.
Really appreciate that, John. And I appreciate what you're doing here with these podcasts. I think there are stories to be told, and they're interesting to hear because, like you said, they're local, they're relatable, and they're important that they're told. They may not be in the Wall Street Journal, but they still are great stories with a lot of valuable insights. So glad to see this community thriving and growing and you being a part of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing it with us. All right.